Gold Thread Studios. The Dragon They Overlooked. Season 1, Episode 2. The Partnership. Every bridge begins the same way. Not with steel. Not with concrete. Not even with an engineer's drawing. It begins with trust. One person believes another person will do what they promised. One worker believes another tightened the bolt correctly. One architect believes the calculations are sound. Trust is invisible. Yet it carries more weight than any material ever invented. Partnerships are no different. People often believe businesses are built on investment, or technology, or timing. Those things matter. But beneath every successful company lies something far more fragile. The quiet decision to believe another human being. That belief had carried Ethan Liang across the Pacific Ocean. It had introduced him to Li Wei. It had opened the doors of Horizon Dynamics. It had filled conference rooms with possibility. And it had begun weaving together the lives of 3 people who still believed the future could be written with honest hands. Beijing watched them without judgment. The city had seen partnerships become legends. It had also seen them become cautionary tales. The difference rarely revealed itself at the beginning. Because betrayal never introduces itself as betrayal. It arrives wearing the face of friendship. Building tomorrow. Snow had disappeared from the sidewalks. Winter remained. The mornings were cold enough for every breath to become visible, but the city had already adjusted. Construction cranes swung above new office towers. Cyclists leaned into the northern wind. Street vendors handed steaming cups of soy milk to commuters rushing toward subway stations. Beijing never waited for perfect weather. Neither did dreamers. Ethan arrived at Horizon Dynamics before sunrise. The lobby lights were still dim. The cleaning staff greeted him with familiar smiles. He greeted each of them by name. He had learned something during his father's years in the restaurant. People remembered being seen. Not because it made them important. Because it reminded them they already were. He stopped beside the reception desk. "Good morning, Mrs. Zhao." She smiled warmly. "You're early again." "So are you." She laughed. "I've been early for 22 years. He grinned. "I've got some catching up to do." As the elevator doors closed, Mrs. Zhao watched him disappear toward the executive floor. Some leaders entered buildings. Others changed the atmosphere simply by arriving. Ethan still didn't know the difference. That was one reason people respected him. On the 38th floor, Li Wei stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows. The skyline stretched toward the distant mountains, softened by pale winter haze. His coffee had gone cold. He hadn't noticed. For the first time in years, Horizon Dynamics felt larger than him. The realization was subtle. Almost impossible to explain. He remained the founder. The chairman still trusted him. The board still listened. Yet every corridor echoed with another name. Not because Ethan had demanded attention. Because excellence naturally attracted it. Li Wei turned away from the glass. Today's schedule offered no time for reflection. The Shanghai Summit was 6 weeks away. A multinational logistics corporation wanted an exclusive demonstration. The engineering team needed final approval for the next software build. Investors expected progress. There was too much work to allow emotion into the room. Or so he told himself. Ethan entered carrying 2 coffees. "I guessed." Li Wei looked surprised. "You remembered. You take yours without sugar." A brief smile crossed Li Wei's face. "Thank you." For a moment, everything felt normal again. 2 partners. 2 friends. 2 men trying to build something extraordinary. Neither realized how precious ordinary moments become once they're gone. Thread lesson. The strongest foundations are built long before anyone notices the building. So are the first hidden cracks. the company they dreamed together. There is a season in every partnership when success feels effortless. Ideas arrive before sunrise. Problems disappear before lunch. Opportunities seem to find you instead of the other way around. People often call it momentum. But momentum is a dangerous teacher. It convinces good people that tomorrow will always resemble today. It whispers that what has been built can never be broken. History smiles at such confidence. Because history knows. The tallest towers rarely fear the wind. They fear the tiny fractures no one notices inside the foundation. January settled comfortably over Beijing. The city's winter had become part of everyday life. Steam rose from food stalls along Wangfujing. The aroma of roasted sweet potatoes drifted between shoppers bundled beneath thick coats. Morning sunlight reflected brilliantly against the glass towers of the central business district, while ancient temple roofs remained dusted with traces of old snow. The city carried both ambition and patience in equal measure. It never hurried. Neither did greatness. Inside Horizon Dynamics, every floor buzzed with life. New employees arrived almost weekly. Fresh desks filled previously empty corners. Conference rooms remained occupied from dawn until evening. Ideas covered whiteboards faster than anyone could erase them. The company no longer resembled a startup. It was becoming an institution. Ethan walked through the engineering department carrying nothing more than a notebook. No entourage. No executive assistant. He stopped beside a young programmer staring at several monitors. "You've been looking at that problem for an hour." The programmer laughed nervously. "It feels longer." "What if you're solving the wrong problem?" The young man frowned. Ethan pulled a chair beside him. Instead of suggesting an answer, he asked questions. What does the customer actually need? What happens if this feature disappears? Which part creates value? 10 minutes later, the programmer's eyes widened. "I've been fixing the symptom, not the cause." Ethan smiled. "Happens to all of us." He stood. "Call me if you get stuck." The young engineer watched him leave. Later that afternoon, he told 3 coworkers, "I've never had a CEO make me feel smarter instead of smaller." Stories like that traveled quickly. Meanwhile, Li Wei spent the morning meeting with venture capital firms. The meetings went well. Very well. Investors admired Horizon Dynamics. Revenue projections exceeded expectations. Expansion into Southeast Asia appeared increasingly likely. Every conversation ended the same way. "Please send our regards to Ethan." It was always spoken politely, never intentionally. Yet every repetition quietly echoed inside Li Wei's thoughts. That evening, the entire executive team gathered around a long oak table overlooking Beijing. Blueprints, financial reports, market research. The next 12 months would shape the company's future. The chairman spoke first. "We're no longer asking whether we'll succeed. We're asking how large we should become." Silence followed. It was the silence of possibility. One by one, department heads presented expansion plans. Singapore, Tokyo, Dubai, San Francisco, London. Each city represented another dream waiting to become reality. Finally, the chairman looked toward Ethan. "What concerns you most?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied the map spread across the table. "We're talking a great deal about growth." Heads nodded. "We should." He smiled. "But growth creates another question." The room waited. "How do we stay the same company when we become 10 times larger?" The room grew thoughtful. "Our culture built this business. If we lose that, we'll simply become another successful company." No one spoke. Because everyone understood the difference. Across the table, Li Wei watched another room fall quietly under Ethan's influence. No arguments. No speeches. Just thoughtful questions. That had become Ethan's gift. He rarely convinced people. He invited them to convince themselves. It was remarkably difficult to compete with. Across Beijing, Lin Xiaoyu sat inside a quiet tea house with an old university professor. They met every January. Not to discuss law. To discuss life. The professor poured fresh jasmine tea. Are you happy? Lin smiled. You never ask easy questions. They're usually the only worthwhile ones. She looked out toward the snow-covered courtyard. I think I've become very good at protecting companies. But I sometimes wonder, who's protecting the people inside them? The professor nodded slowly. The law protects ownership. Wisdom protects relationships. She quietly wrote the sentence into her notebook. Later that night, Ethan remained alone inside Horizon Dynamics. The city glowed beyond the windows. He walked through the nearly empty engineering floor, switching off forgotten monitors. One by one, desk by desk. He paused beside a whiteboard, still covered with ideas from that morning's brainstorming session. He smiled. No signature appeared beneath any suggestion. No names. Only solutions. Exactly the way he liked it. Great ideas belong to the team, not the person holding the marker. He quietly erased the board. Tomorrow, it would become empty enough for another impossible idea. Several floors above, Li Wei stood alone once more. His office lights remained off. Only the city illuminated the room. He watched Ethan leave the building below, then looked toward the empty executive conference room. He whispered words no one else would ever hear. What if? The sentence never finished. It didn't need to. Some questions become dangerous. Long before the healthiest partnerships are built by people who celebrate each other's strengths. The moment one partner begins comparing instead of contributing, success quietly becomes a competition instead of a shared victory. The measure of a leader. There are two kinds of leaders. The first walks into a room asking, "What can these people do for my company?" The second asks, "What can my company become because of these people?" From the outside, the difference is almost impossible to see. Both hold meetings. Both make decisions. Both speak confidently. But over time, one builds an organization. The other builds a legacy. Legacy was never something Ethan Liang consciously pursued. He simply believed people produced their best work when they felt respected. He had learned that lesson years ago. Not from a business school. From a small family restaurant in San Jose. His father never referred to the dishwasher as the dishwasher. He called him Mr. Alvarez. He never called the waitress the server. She was May. He knew every birthday, every child's name, every family hardship. When Ethan once asked why, his father smiled. Restaurants don't serve food. They serve people. Food is simply how we begin the conversation. Now, standing inside Horizon Dynamics, Ethan realized technology wasn't very different. The company cafeteria overlooked a quiet courtyard where snow still lingered beneath evergreen trees. It was lunchtime. Executives and interns stood in the same line. No private dining room. No reserved seating. That had been Ethan's suggestion. If we're building one company, we should eat at one table. The idea had seemed unusual at first. Now no one questioned it. He carried his tray toward an empty seat. Halfway there, he noticed Machen eating alone. Mind if I join you? She looked surprised. You don't have another meeting? They'll survive 5 extra minutes. She laughed. Around them, conversations continued. No one seemed particularly interested in what the CEO was doing. That pleased Ethan. It meant the culture had become normal, not performative. May hesitated before asking, "Can I tell you something?" "Always." "I almost quit engineering." Ethan looked genuinely surprised. "When?" "My final year at university." She stared quietly at her bowl of noodles. "I thought I wasn't smart enough." "What changed?" "A professor." She smiled softly. "He didn't tell me I was brilliant. He simply said, 'You're asking better questions than everyone else.'" She laughed. "I stayed because of one sentence." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. You never know which conversation changes someone's life. Across the cafeteria, Li Wei watched from another table. He wasn't eavesdropping. He simply noticed another employee leaving lunch smiling. Again. That afternoon, the engineering division faced its biggest challenge since Ethan's arrival. A software update unexpectedly failed during internal testing. Systems froze. Data synchronization stopped. For the first time in months, panic entered the room. Voices rose. Developers spoke over one another. Deadlines suddenly seemed impossible. Ethan stepped quietly to the center of the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't assign blame. He simply asked, "Is anyone hurt?" The room fell silent. Several engineers exchanged confused glances. Finally, someone answered, "No." "Good." He nodded. "Then we've only lost software. Not people. Not trust. Not tomorrow. Let's solve one problem at a time." The atmosphere changed almost instantly. Fear gave way to focus. Within 3 hours, the issue had been identified. By evening, the platform was stable again. One of the senior engineers looked toward Ethan. "I've worked for companies where this would have ended with people getting fired." Ethan smiled. "If people are afraid to make mistakes, they'll eventually become afraid to innovate." Li Wei stood behind the glass walls of his office, watching, listening. The crisis had been handled perfectly. Not because Ethan knew every technical answer, because he knew people. That realization unsettled him more than any investor meeting ever had. You could study finance, negotiation, marketing. Leadership books filled entire libraries. But how did someone learn that? Across the city, Lin Xiaoyu received an unexpected visitor. A young entrepreneur, 26 years old. His startup had lost 2 co-founders during an argument over ownership. He placed a stack of unsigned contracts on her desk. "I thought we were friends." Lin looked at the papers. "Maybe you were." "What happened?" "We stopped talking." She nodded slowly. Friendships don't usually end because of one conversation. They end because of all the conversations people never have. The young founder lowered his head. "I wish someone had told me that earlier." Lin closed the file. "So do I." That evening, snow began falling again. Large, quiet flakes drifted across Beijing. Ethan left the office later than usual. Instead of calling a car, he walked. The city felt peaceful beneath fresh snow. An elderly man carefully swept the entrance of his tiny tea shop, though new snow continued falling almost as quickly as he cleared it. Ethan stopped. "Why sweep now?" The old man smiled. "Because customers are coming, but the snow will cover it again." The old man leaned on his broom. "Then I'll sweep again." He laughed warmly. Some work is never finished. It simply deserves doing. Ethan thanked him, then continued walking. He carried the lesson with him all the way home. High above the city, Li Wei watched the snowfall from his office window. His reflection stared back from the dark glass. He remembered something Ethan had said weeks earlier. Technology should reduce distance between people, Everyone admired that sentence. Everyone quoted it. Sometimes Li Wei wished it had been his. That thought frightened him. Not because it existed. Because it no longer felt unfamiliar. Thread lesson. A true leader doesn't create followers. They create people who believe they are capable of more than they imagined. And sometimes, that quiet gift becomes the very thing another person begins to envy. The invitation. Success has a peculiar habit. It attracts opportunities and observers. Some people come because they want to help build the future. Others arrive because they want to discover how the future is being built. The two often look identical. They smile the same, shake hands the same, offer congratulations with the same polished confidence. Only time reveals the difference. That is why wisdom never mistakes access for loyalty. The invitation arrived on a quiet Thursday morning. It wasn't delivered by courier or announced during a meeting. It appeared in Ethan's inbox with little fanfare. Dragon Gate Capital Private Executive Reception. An invitation-only gathering of Asia's most influential technology founders, venture capitalists, government innovation advisors, and Fortune 500 executives. Location. A restored Qing Dynasty courtyard hidden behind modern office towers in Beijing's Dongcheng district. Attendance. Limited to 60 guests. Dress code. Business formal. Li Wei looked over Ethan's shoulder. They only invite people they're watching. Ethan smiled. I hope that's a good thing. Li Wei answered without hesitation. It usually is. That evening, black sedans quietly arrived one after another beneath red lanterns hanging from ancient wooden beams. The courtyard felt timeless. Centuries-old architecture embraced a gathering discussing artificial intelligence, robotics, quantum computing, and global markets. Old China. New China. Standing comfortably beside one another. Inside, conversations flowed in Mandarin, English, Japanese, Korean, and occasionally German. No microphones. No presentations. Only ideas. The kind that changed industries before newspapers ever learned they existed. Ethan found himself speaking with a retired aerospace engineer. Not about software. About curiosity. The older man smiled. You know why children learn so quickly? Ethan shook his head. They're not afraid to look foolish. He sipped his tea. Adults become experts. Experts become prisoners of certainty. Ethan laughed softly. I'll try to avoid that. Don't try. The old engineer smiled. Practice. Across the courtyard, Li Wei spoke with investors. His conversations were flawless. Disciplined. Professional. Exactly the kind expected from a respected founder. Yet every few minutes, he noticed another guest introducing themselves to Ethan. Another business card exchanged. Another conversation lingering longer than expected. No one ignored Li Wei. But more and more people sought Ethan. The difference was subtle. Painfully subtle. Near the koi pond, a woman stood quietly observing the gathering. She wasn't speaking. She was listening. Lin Xiaoyu had attended at the request of one of her firm's senior partners. Corporate lawyers often learned more during informal conversations than inside conference rooms. She watched founders discussing mergers, investors debating ethics, engineers imagining impossible futures. Then she noticed him. Not because he spoke the loudest, because he listened the longest. Ethan rarely interrupted. When someone finished speaking, he paused before answering, as though every conversation deserved respect. She smiled almost unconsciously. Good listeners were becoming increasingly rare. The evening continued. At one point, the event host tapped a glass gently. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce someone many of you will soon know. He gestured toward Ethan. Our newest innovator from California, Mr. Ethan Liang. Polite applause echoed across the courtyard. Ethan looked almost embarrassed. He walked forward, accepted the microphone, then surprised everyone. I'll keep this very short. Laughter rippled through the audience. My parents taught me something. They said, if you're the smartest person speaking, you're probably not learning enough. More laughter. So tonight, I'd rather hear your stories than tell mine. He handed the microphone back. The applause lasted longer than his speech. Lin watched thoughtfully. Most ambitious founders tried to become unforgettable. This one seemed comfortable letting other people shine. Interesting. Very interesting. On the drive home, neither Ethan nor Li Wei spoke for several minutes. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. That was inspiring. Li Wei nodded. It was useful. Ethan smiled. You sound like my accountant. Li Wei laughed. Someone has to. For a moment, the old friendship resurfaced again. Natural. Easy. Almost untouched. Back in his apartment, Li Wei removed his jacket. His phone buzzed. A message from one of the investors he'd met that evening. Excellent event tonight. By the way, Ethan has remarkable presence. Protect him. He's a rare talent. Li Wei stared at the message. Protect him. The words lingered. Why did everyone assume Ethan needed protecting? Why did no one ask who had built the company that gave Ethan this stage? He placed the phone face down. For the first time, the thought entered his mind completely. Not a whisper. Not a passing feeling. A fully formed idea. Maybe people would respect me more if they believed this vision had always been mine. The room fell silent. Even Li Wei seemed startled by his own thought. He quickly pushed it away. Ashamed. Disturbed. He wasn't that man. At least, not yet. Across the city, Lin Xiaoyu stood on her apartment balcony overlooking Beijing's endless lights. She found herself thinking about the quiet entrepreneur who preferred listening over speaking. She smiled, then laughed at herself. You don't even know his name. The winter wind carried her voice into the sleeping city. Somewhere beyond the skyline, fate quietly smiled, because before long, she would know his name very well. Thread lesson. Opportunity introduces us to remarkable people. Character determines whether we celebrate their gifts or secretly wish they belonged to us. A name worth remembering. There is a moment in every rising company when success stops belonging only to the people inside the building. Customers begin talking. Universities begin teaching case studies. Competitors begin paying attention. And somewhere, people you've never met begin speaking your name in rooms you have never entered. Most founders dream about that moment. Few understand the price it asks in return. Recognition is generous, but it is never evenly distributed. By the end of January, Horizon Dynamics had become one of Beijing's fastest-growing technology companies. Financial newspapers praised its innovation. Business podcasts debated its future. Recruiters called employees almost daily with lucrative offers. The company cafeteria buzzed with excitement every morning. No one talked about surviving anymore. Now they talked about changing the industry. Dreams had become plans. Plans had become deadlines. Deadlines had become reality. One Monday morning, Ethan entered the engineering floor carrying a cardboard box. Inside, fresh pastries from a small family bakery he discovered over the weekend. The aroma spread quickly. Within minutes, developers emerged from behind computer screens. Someone laughed. What's the occasion? Ethan shrugged. Monday. More laughter. You don't need another reason? No. He smiled. I've never liked Mondays. Maybe pastries can fix that. The entire department laughed. For 15 minutes. No one discussed software, or deadlines, or investors. They spoke about families, favorite foods, childhood memories, the newest cafe near the office. When everyone returned to work, the room somehow felt lighter. Sometimes productivity wasn't created by working harder. Sometimes it began with reminding people they were human. Later that afternoon, a prestigious business magazine arrived for a scheduled interview. The editor requested a tour of Horizon Dynamics. Li Wei personally welcomed the journalists. The interview began well. The company's vision, its rapid growth, its international ambitions. Everything unfolded exactly as expected, until the editor asked one unexpected question. If we interviewed your employees separately, who would they say defines the culture of Horizon Dynamics? The room became quiet. Li Wei answered professionally. Our culture belongs to everyone. The editor smiled. That's an excellent answer. But unofficially? Silence lingered. Before Li Wei could respond, the editor laughed politely. I suppose I'll find out. An hour later, the journalists walked through every department. They spoke with programmers, receptionists, designers, security staff, project managers. Without realizing it, a pattern emerged. Nearly everyone mentioned Ethan. Not because he was more important, because he was more visible. He knows everyone's name. He still reviews junior developers' ideas. He thanks the cleaning staff every evening. He asks questions before giving answers. The editor quietly filled page after page with notes. Culture. He realized. Had a face. Li Wei received a preview of the article 3 days later. The headline read, "The company changing how leadership looks." The opening photograph showed Ethan standing among young engineers, laughing, listening, not speaking. Li Wei continued reading. Every paragraph praised Horizon Dynamics. Every sentence celebrated the company. Yet somehow, his own contributions seemed smaller than he remembered. Not absent. Simply overshadowed. He closed the magazine. For the first time, success no longer felt shared. It felt divided. Across Beijing, Lin Xiaoyu stood before a lecture hall filled with young law students. She had been invited to speak about corporate ethics. One student asked, "Can contracts prevent betrayal?" She smiled gently. "No." The room looked surprised. Contracts define responsibility. They cannot create character. Another student raised his hand. Then what protects a partnership? Lin thought for a long moment. The daily decision. To value the relationship more than the advantage. Silence filled the lecture hall. Some lessons required no further explanation. That evening, the executive team gathered once more. Plans for Shanghai continued. New partnerships, international licensing, patent approvals. Everything pointed toward a remarkable future. As the meeting ended, the chairman stopped Ethan. "Walk with me." Together they overlooked the city. "I've been doing this for 35 years. Ethan smiled. "Longer than I've been alive." The chairman laughed. "Don't remind me." Then his expression softened. "I've noticed something." "What?" "You make people believe." Ethan looked puzzled. "I hope so." "No." The chairman shook his head. "You don't understand. You make them believe in themselves. He rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Never lose that. Across the room, Li Wei had just returned to retrieve forgotten documents. He wasn't meant to hear the conversation, but he did. Every word. He quietly stepped back into the hallway. No one noticed he had been there. Outside, snow began falling again. Gentle, silent, beautiful. Li Wei stood beneath the office entrance, watching flakes disappear against the pavement. He thought about the magazine, the investors, the engineers, the chairman. Every road seemed to lead back to Ethan. For weeks, he had told himself he was imagining it. Tonight, he stopped pretending. He finally admitted the truth. He was jealous. The confession brought no relief, only silence. Because once a person names the darkness growing inside them, they must decide whether to confront it or feed it. Li Wei turned toward the city. The lights of Beijing stretched endlessly before him. Somewhere beyond those lights, a decision was already beginning to take shape. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon. Very soon. Thread lesson. The most dangerous battles are not fought against competitors. They are fought inside our own hearts. Because the moment admiration becomes envy, every success begins looking like something that was taken instead of shared. The quiet advantage. The world has always misunderstood genius. It imagines sleepless nights, lightning flashes of inspiration, a single brilliant idea that changes everything. Sometimes those moments happen. Most of the time, greatness is quieter. It arrives early, leaves late, listens more than it speaks, asks one more question after everyone else believes the discussion is finished. The greatest advantage is rarely intelligence. It is consistency. Day after ordinary day, choice after ordinary choice, until ordinary effort becomes extraordinary results. February arrived beneath clear blue skies. Winter still held Beijing tightly, but the days were growing longer. The city's parks slowly filled again. Children chased pigeons across wide stone courtyards. Street musicians returned to familiar corners. Office workers lingered outside cafes for an extra few minutes before returning to meetings. Even the city seemed to sense that spring was approaching. Hope had a season. Horizon dynamics had become impossible to ignore. Applications arrived from graduates at Tsinghua University, Peking University, MIT, Stanford, and the National University of Singapore. Young engineers didn't simply want higher salaries. They wanted to work somewhere ideas mattered. The human resources director placed another stack of resumes on Ethan's desk. We've never seen numbers like this. Ethan flipped through several applications, then stopped. Let's remove the university names. The director looked puzzled. Why? I don't want prestige. I want potential. But we'll read every application the same way. She smiled. I think the board will like that. Ethan shook his head gently. I don't care if they like it. I care if it's fair. The hiring process changed that afternoon. University names disappeared. Family backgrounds disappeared. Only skills. Ideas. Curiosity. Character. For the first time, a graduate from a small provincial university scored higher than applicants from internationally famous schools. Several managers looked surprised. Ethan wasn't. Talent had never respected geography. Across the hallway, Li Wei watched another policy become part of Horizon's culture. He couldn't disagree with it. It was thoughtful, fair, progressive. The problem wasn't the idea. The problem was becoming increasingly difficult to remember which ideas had been his, and which had been Ethan's. The lines were beginning to blur. That frightened him. Later that afternoon, The executive team met with representatives from a multinational logistics company. The presentation went smoothly until one executive leaned forward. "We have one concern." The room quieted. What happens if Horizon Dynamics becomes dependent on one visionary? The question lingered. Every eye turned toward Ethan. He smiled. "I hope we never do." Confused expressions appeared around the table. He continued. "If this company cannot thrive without me, I've failed as a leader." He pointed toward the engineering department visible through the glass walls. "Our greatest product isn't software. It's the people learning to build without needing permission." Silence settled across the room. The logistics executive slowly nodded. "That's exactly the answer we hoped to hear." After the meeting, one investor quietly approached Li Wei. "You chose the right partner." Li Wei smiled politely. "I believe I did." The investor continued walking. The compliment stayed behind. Across Beijing, Lin Xiaoyu found herself defending a small family business against a much larger corporation. The legal issue wasn't complicated. The power imbalance was. During a break, the elderly owner thanked her. "I can't afford lawyers like you." Lin smiled. "You already have one." The old man laughed. "No." He shook his head. "I have someone who remembers that justice shouldn't depend on money." Those words stayed with her long after the hearing ended. That evening, Ethan wandered back into the old bookstore. The elderly bookseller looked up immediately. "I've been expecting you." Ethan laughed. "You always say that." "Because you're always back." The bookseller reached beneath the counter. "I found something." He handed Ethan a thin, weathered journal written nearly a century earlier by a Chinese engineer who had studied abroad before returning home. Inside one page, a single sentence had been carefully underlined. "Never measure your worth by the applause around another man." Ethan smiled. "That's beautiful." The bookseller nodded. "It saved me once." He paused. "I hope neither of us ever forgets it." At the same moment, Li Wei remained alone in his office. The building had emptied. Snow had begun falling again. His computer screen displayed Horizon Dynamics' organizational chart. Department after department. Team after team. His eyes drifted toward Ethan's name. He stared for a long time, then quietly closed the file. Not because he had finished thinking, because he hadn't. The question growing inside him no longer disappeared when work ended. It came home with him. It sat beside him during dinner. It followed him into sleep. That frightened him more than he wanted to admit. He still had a choice. To celebrate another man's success, or to resent it. The tragedy of human nature is that sometimes we don't realize which path we've chosen until we've walked too far to recognize ourselves. Thread lesson. Real leadership isn't proven by becoming indispensable. It's proven by helping others become capable enough that they no longer need you every moment. The insecure fear that day. The wise prepare for it. The first fracture. No bridge collapses the day the first crack appears. People continue crossing it. Children laugh upon it. Cars pass over it. Life goes on exactly as before. Because the crack is too small to frighten anyone. Invisible things often are. Trust fractures the same way. Not with betrayal. With silence. With conversations delayed. With doubts left unexplained. By the time everyone notices, the damage has usually been there for a very long time. The Shanghai Global Technology Summit was now less than a month away. Every department inside Horizon Dynamics operated with remarkable precision. Design teams refined every visual detail. Engineers tested systems around the clock. The legal department reviewed intellectual property filings. Marketing teams coordinated interviews with international media. The company moved like a finely tuned orchestra. Every person understood their role. Every person believed they were building history. One Tuesday morning, Ethan arrived carrying another notebook. Not the worn leather journal he had owned for years. A fresh one. Its pages completely blank. Machen noticed immediately. "You filled the last one already?" Ethan smiled. "Almost. What happens when you finish?" "I start another." She laughed. "You never run out of ideas?" He shook his head. "No. I run out of pages." The engineers nearby laughed. One quietly whispered, "I hope I still enjoy work like that when I'm 40. Ethan overheard him. "I hope you enjoy it more." Across the executive floor, Li Wei watched the interaction through the glass. Something about the notebook bothered him. Not because it was important, because he knew what it represented. Ideas. Original ideas. The kind investors admired. The kind journalists wrote about. The kind history remembered. He suddenly realized something unsettling. He couldn't remember the last time he had written down an idea simply because it excited him. Lately, everything had become management. Meetings. Budgets. Forecasts. Risk. When had leadership quietly replaced imagination? That afternoon, the chairman called both founders into his office. He poured tea himself, a habit he reserved for conversations that mattered. "I've received a proposal." Neither man spoke. "A multinational corporation has offered to acquire Horizon Dynamics." Silence settled heavily over the room. The chairman slid a folder across the table. The number printed on the final page was astonishing. Enough money to change several lifetimes. Li Wei looked at Ethan, then back at the chairman. "What do you think?" The older man smiled. "I'm asking you." Li Wei answered first. "It's tempting." "Very tempting." Then the chairman turned toward Ethan. "What about you?" Ethan looked at the skyline before answering. "My father used to tell me something." The chairman smiled. "I've noticed your father had an answer for everything." Ethan laughed. He said, "Don't sell the tree because someone offered a good price for the first apple." The room became quiet. "I think we're just getting started." The chairman slowly nodded. "So do I." The folder closed. The acquisition discussion ended. Outside the office, no one knew a billion-dollar decision had just been made in less than 15 minutes. The following day, news somehow leaked. Not the amount. Only that Horizon Dynamics had rejected a major acquisition. Financial media exploded with speculation. Investors praised the confidence. Competitors questioned the decision. Employees celebrated. The engineering floor applauded when they heard. Someone shouted, "We're staying independent." Cheers echoed across the office. Ethan simply smiled. The celebration wasn't about money. It was about believing the future was worth building. That evening, Li Wei met privately with an old university classmate, a successful venture capitalist. They shared dinner inside a quiet restaurant overlooking the city. His friend leaned back. "I've been watching Horizon." Li Wei nodded. "I know. You've built something extraordinary." Li Wei smiled politely. Then came the sentence that lingered. "You know, if Ethan ever leaves, the company's valuation will probably drop overnight." The words landed with unexpected force. Li Wei forced a laugh. "You really think so?" His friend shrugged. "The market follows vision. The market thinks Ethan is the vision." Silence. The waiter quietly refilled their tea. Neither man spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Li Wei asked a question he hadn't planned to ask. What if the market was wrong? His friend looked puzzled. "Is it?" Across Beijing, Lin Xiaoyu stood outside the courthouse watching light snow drift across the steps. Her mentor joined her. You look troubled. I've been thinking. Dangerous habit. She laughed softly. I keep seeing partnerships fall apart. The older lawyer nodded. They usually don't fall apart because of money. No, they fall apart because someone begins rewriting history. Lin frowned slightly. What do you mean? The mentor looked toward the snowy streets. One partner starts remembering every success as theirs, and every sacrifice as someone else's. He sighed. By the time they believe that story, the partnership is already over. Those words settled deeply inside her, though she didn't yet know why. Late that night, Ethan opened his new notebook. The first page remained blank for several moments. Then he wrote only one sentence. Build something that deserves to outlive you. He closed the notebook. Satisfied. Across the city, Li Wei also opened a notebook. His page remained blank much longer. Finally, he wrote something different. History only remembers one founder. He stared at the sentence. Read it again. Then quietly closed the book. Outside, snow continued falling over Beijing, covering rooftops, covering sidewalks, covering every visible crack. But snow has never repaired broken stone. It only hides it. Until spring. Thread lesson. The most dangerous lie is the one we repeat until it begins sounding like truth. Protect your memories as carefully as your reputation. Because history is often rewritten long before it's retold. The weight of applause. Applause is one of the most misunderstood sounds in the world. To the audience, it lasts only a few seconds. To the person receiving it, it can echo for years. Sometimes it becomes encouragement. Sometimes it becomes pressure. And sometimes, to the person standing beside the applause, it becomes a reminder of everything they fear they are losing. Recognition has never belonged to only one person. Neither has envy. Both spread quietly through every room they enter. The Shanghai Global Technology Summit was now only 3 weeks away. Beijing's technology community spoke of little else. Government ministers would attend. International investors had confirmed their flights. Journalists from New York, London, Singapore, Tokyo, and Seoul had requested interviews. For Horizon Dynamics, this wasn't simply another conference. It was an introduction to the world. The engineering department worked late into the evening. Large digital displays tracked every milestone. Green indicators meant success. Yellow meant caution. Red demanded immediate attention. Ethan wandered between workstations carrying a marker instead of a laptop. He rarely touched anyone's keyboard. Instead, he asked questions. What if we simplify this? What would the customer expect? What happens if nothing goes according to plan? The answers always came from the engineers themselves. That was intentional. He wanted people to trust their own thinking, not depend upon his. Near sunset, a junior developer approached nervously. Mr. Liang. Ethan looked up immediately. Call me Ethan. The young man smiled awkwardly. Ethan. I think I found a security weakness. Instead of frustration, Ethan's face brightened. Excellent. The engineer blinked. Excellent. You found it before our customers did. He clapped the young developer gently on the shoulder. That's how great companies become safer. Within minutes, half the cybersecurity team had gathered around the workstation, not searching for someone to blame, searching for a better solution. From the executive offices, Li Wei watched the scene unfold. No panic. No raised voices. Only collaboration. He quietly admitted something to himself. Ethan possessed a gift that couldn't be taught. He made people feel safe enough to be honest. That realization should have inspired admiration. Instead, it deepened the distance growing inside him. The following afternoon, Horizon Dynamics hosted a press day. Television cameras filled the lobby. Photographers adjusted lighting. Reporters prepared notebooks. The communications director whispered to Li Wei. "They're asking specifically for Ethan." Li Wei nodded politely. "Scheduled both of us." The interviews began. One reporter asked Ethan, "What's the greatest lesson you've learned since moving to Beijing?" He smiled thoughtfully. "That belonging isn't something a city gives you. It's something you earn by respecting the people already there." Another asked, "What's your greatest achievement?" Ethan laughed. "We haven't built it yet." The reporters smiled. One quietly remarked, "No wonder people like interviewing him." Li Wei heard it. The sentence wasn't meant for him. Yet somehow, it reached him anyway. Across Beijing, Lin Xiaoyu spent the afternoon mediating a dispute between two business partners. Neither argued about money. They argued about credit. "I created the company." "No, we built it together." Hours passed. Neither man changed his position. When the meeting finally ended without resolution, Lin remained alone in the conference room. She looked at two empty chairs facing one another, then quietly wrote a sentence inside her notebook. "When gratitude disappears, memory becomes unreliable." She closed the notebook. Something about that sentence unsettled her. Late that evening, the Horizon executive team gathered for one final review before Shanghai. The chairman stood before a projection screen. "Our presentation is ready. Our patents are protected. Our investors are committed." He smiled proudly. "I believe we're ready." Everyone applauded. As the meeting ended, the chairman stopped Ethan once more. "I'd like you to deliver the keynote demonstration in Shanghai." The room grew quiet. It had always been the plan. Yet hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Ethan nodded respectfully. "I'll do my best." "You always do." The chairman smiled. Across the table, Li Wei remained perfectly still. He had expected the announcement. He had even agreed to it weeks earlier. So why did hearing it now feel different? Because agreement made in private can feel very different when spoken before witnesses. After everyone left, Li Wei remained alone inside the conference room. The chairs sat empty. Presentation slides still glowed faintly on the screen. He replayed the chairman's words. "I'd like you to deliver the keynote." Not, "We'd like both founders." Not, "Our leadership team." Just Ethan. He looked toward the city lights beyond the glass. The silence seemed heavier than usual. Then, his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on Horizon's success. I'd like to discuss a confidential business opportunity. No obligations. Just a conversation. No name. Only a private meeting request." Li Wei stared at the message. His thumb hovered over the screen. For several long moments, he considered deleting it. Instead, he typed 2 words. "When?" He pressed send. Immediately, a reply arrived. "Tomorrow evening. The Jade Pavilion. Private room." Li Wei locked his phone. His reflection stared back from the dark window. Outside, Beijing continued shining as though nothing had changed. But somewhere in the city, someone had noticed the growing fracture, and someone intended to use it. End of chapter 8. Thread lesson. The greatest dangers rarely force open the door until someone quietly unlocks it from the inside. Guard your heart before you guard your business. The Jade Pavilion. Every betrayal has 2 beginnings. The first exists in the heart. The second begins with a meeting. Not in a dark alley. Not beneath the cover of midnight. But somewhere surprisingly ordinary. A restaurant. An office. A quiet conversation over tea. History has always preferred ordinary places. Because ordinary places rarely attract suspicion. The Jade Pavilion stood hidden behind a bamboo garden in Beijing's Chaoyang district. From the outside, it appeared to be another elegant restaurant serving traditional Cantonese cuisine. Inside, government officials negotiated policy. Corporate founders discussed acquisitions. Investors quietly decided the future of companies that had never yet appeared in newspapers. The private rooms had thick wooden doors. The conversations inside rarely left them. Li Wei arrived exactly 3 minutes early. Punctuality had always been one of his habits. The hostess bowed politely. "This way, mister." She led him through a narrow hallway lined with ink paintings and carved rosewood panels. Room 7. The door stood slightly open. Inside, a man in his early 60s poured tea into 2 porcelain cups. His suit was perfectly tailored. His expression impossible to read. He stood as Li Wei entered. "Thank you for coming." Li Wei remained cautious. "You know my name?" The older man smiled. "I know quite a lot about horizon dynamics." He gestured toward the empty chair. "Please." For several moments, neither man discussed business. Instead, they spoke about Beijing, its changing skyline, the speed of technological innovation, the challenges of building companies in a rapidly evolving world. The conversation felt effortless, almost too effortless. Finally, the older man placed his teacup on the table. "You've built something remarkable." Li Wei nodded politely. "We've tried." The man smiled faintly. "We've." Interesting. Li Wei noticed the emphasis immediately. "What do you mean?" The man folded his hands calmly. "Every interview. Every article. Every investor conversation. The world seems fascinated by Ethan Liang." Silence. The older man continued gently. "That must be frustrating." Li Wei didn't answer. He didn't need to. Silence often reveals more than words. "I'm not here to insult you," the man said. "I'm here because I recognize talent." He leaned forward slightly. "The tragedy is that history rarely remembers second names." Li Wei's jaw tightened. "I'm not second." "No?" The man asked the question without accusation. Only curiosity. "You founded Horizon. You assembled the investors. You spent years building relationships." He paused. "So tell me, when people discuss your company 5 years from now, whose face will they remember?" The room became painfully quiet. Across Beijing, Ethan sat inside the engineering department surrounded by half a dozen developers. Pizza boxes covered one end of the conference table. Laptops covered the other. No executives. No formal meeting. Just people solving problems together. A young engineer suddenly laughed. "I've got it." Everyone looked up. He pointed toward the screen. "We've been solving this backward." Ethan smiled. "Show us." For the next 20 minutes, the youngest engineer in the room led the discussion. No one interrupted. No one cared who received the credit. Only that the solution worked. When it finally did, the room erupted into applause. Ethan clapped louder than anyone. He looked genuinely proud. Not because he had solved the problem. Because someone else had. Back at the Jade Pavilion, the older gentleman reached into his briefcase. He removed a slim folder. Didn't open it. Simply rested it on the table. "What is that?" Li Wei asked. "A possibility." "What kind?" "The kind successful people eventually receive." He slid the folder forward. Inside were public articles, magazine covers, conference schedules, photographs. Every page featured Ethan. Very few mentioned Horizon's founding story. Even fewer mentioned Li Wei. The older man didn't need to explain. The evidence spoke quietly for itself. You see. Li Wei closed the folder. Media chooses narratives. They do. And narratives become history. The older man smiled. I'm not suggesting you betray anyone. The sentence sounded strangely rehearsed. I'm suggesting that founders deserve recognition for what they built. He stood, straightened his jacket. Our conversation ends here. Li Wei looked confused. That's all. The older man nodded. I never ask people to make important decisions immediately. He walked toward the door. I simply invite them to think. The door closed softly behind him. Li Wei remained alone. The untouched tea had gone cold. Across the city, Lin Xiaoyu worked late reviewing a complex intellectual property agreement. One sentence caught her attention. She read it twice, then reached for her pen. The clause technically protected ownership, but not contribution. She quietly rewrote it. Her assistant looked curious. Does that really matter? Lin answered without looking up. It matters more than almost anything. People rarely fight over success. They fight over who history says created it. She underlined the revision. Without realizing it, she had just described the future waiting for Horizon Dynamics. Near midnight, Li Wei finally returned home. He loosened his tie, poured himself a glass of water, then opened the folder once more. Photograph after photograph. Headline after headline. Each one quietly asking the same question. Who built Horizon Dynamics? He looked toward the dark city beyond his apartment window. For the first time, he didn't feel angry. He felt forgotten. And forgotten people sometimes convince themselves that almost anything is justified if it means being remembered. Thread lesson. Very few people are tempted by evil itself. Most are tempted by a story that makes the wrong choice sound reasonable. That is why wisdom questions every voice that flatters our wounded pride. The price of recognition. Recognition is a strange currency. The more generously it is shared, the more valuable it becomes. Yet to an insecure heart, recognition feels limited. Every compliment given to another person seems like one less available for you. It is an illusion. But illusions have changed the course of nations, destroyed families, broken friendships, and brought remarkable companies to their knees. The following morning, Beijing awoke beneath a brilliant blue sky. The storm clouds had disappeared. Fresh sunlight reflected from every office tower in the central business district. The city looked confident, alive, hopeful. Inside Horizon Dynamics, no one noticed anything different. Engineers laughed over morning coffee. Receptionists welcomed visitors. Project managers hurried between conference rooms. The company continued moving forward. Only one person carried yesterday's meeting into today. Li Wei. He entered his office earlier than usual. His assistant greeted him warmly. Good morning. You have 3 investor meetings, 2 media requests, and the Shanghai rehearsal begins at 3. He nodded without looking up. Thank you. She hesitated. Everything all right? He forced a smile. Just thinking. She smiled back. That's usually a good sign. He wasn't so sure. Across the building, Ethan stood beside a whiteboard filled with diagrams. Today's meeting wasn't about software. It was about people. We're growing quickly. The managers nodded. We have a responsibility. He looked around the room. Every new employee should leave their first week believing they joined something that cares about them. One department head asked, how do we do that? Ethan smiled. Remember your first week? Silence. Everyone did. The confusion. The uncertainty. The hope. He continued. Then become the person you needed back then. Pens quietly moved across notebooks. No one realized they had just witnessed another philosophy that would become part of Horizon's culture. That afternoon, the communications department prepared everyone for Shanghai. Media training, interview practice, presentation coaching. The consultant addressed the room. If a journalist asks difficult questions, stay on message. She looked toward Ethan. And remember, you've become one of the public faces of Horizon Dynamics. Li Wei heard the sentence. Public face. Not founder. Not partner. Public face. For words. Yet somehow, they echoed louder than everything else spoken that afternoon. Across Beijing, Lin Xiaoyu visited her late father's grave. She came every year before Lunar New Year. Fresh white chrysanthemums rested beside the stone. She knelt quietly. I won another case. The winter wind answered softly. I wish you could have met the people I've met. She smiled. You would have liked some of them. Her father had taught literature before becoming a judge. He believed stories revealed character long before difficult circumstances did. She remembered one lesson clearly. The hardest person to judge honestly is yourself. She closed her eyes. Some lessons never stopped growing. That evening, the Horizon executive team shared dinner before another late rehearsal. Conversation remained light. Favorite foods, travel stories, plans for Shanghai. Halfway through the meal, the chairman stood. I'd like to make a toast. Everyone raised their glasses. To partnership. He smiled warmly. Great companies aren't built by individuals. They're built by people who choose one another every day. He looked toward Ethan. Then Li Wei. I'm proud of both of you. The room applauded. The toast was genuine. Heartfelt. Perhaps too heartfelt. Because for the first time, Li Wei wondered if everyone else saw something he no longer felt. Partnership. The words suddenly seemed heavier than before. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Li Wei unlocked the drawer containing the confidential folder from the Jade Pavilion. He looked at it for a long time. Then, without opening it, he locked the drawer again. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes. This isn't who I am. The words were barely above a whisper. He wanted to believe them. He truly did. Because deep inside, the man who had built Horizon Dynamics still existed. He was simply becoming harder to hear. Across the city, Ethan stood on his apartment balcony overlooking Beijing. Fireworks began appearing in the distance as families prepared for the Lunar New Year celebrations. Children laughed below. Restaurants filled with families returning home. He smiled. His phone buzzed. A message from his mother. Remember, no matter how successful you become, always leave room at your table for someone who helped you get there. He read it twice, then quietly replied, I will. He never imagined how important those words would soon become. Thread lesson. Character is not revealed by the applause we receive. It is revealed by how we respond when someone standing beside us receives it instead. That is where integrity quietly proves its worth. The Lantern Festival. Some people believe betrayal begins with a lie. It doesn't. It begins the day someone stops celebrating another person's happiness. The lie comes later. The deception comes later. The theft comes later. But the heart changes first. Almost silently. Like winter surrendering to spring. No one notices the first flower. Until suddenly, the entire landscape has changed. The Lantern Festival arrived beneath a crystal-clear February sky. As evening settled over Beijing, thousands of lanterns illuminated streets, bridges, parks, and ancient courtyards. Red lanterns. Golden lanterns. Hand-painted lanterns shaped like dragons, rabbits, lotus blossoms, and cranes. Families gathered beneath them. Children laughed while carrying glowing lanterns no larger than their hands. The city shimmered like a river of stars. For one evening, business slowed. Phones remained in pockets. Families became more important than meetings. Even Horizon Dynamics closed its offices early. The chairman had arranged a company outing. No presentations. No investors. No business discussions. Just people. More than 200 employees gathered beside Shanghai Lake. Food stalls lined the waterfront. Steam rose from skewers of grilled lamb. Sweet Tonghulu reflected tiny lanterns like jewels. Traditional musicians played softly from a nearby pavilion. For a few hours, everyone simply belonged. Ethan wandered through the crowd carrying a paper lantern. A little girl accidentally bumped into him. Her lantern slipped from her hands. Before it touched the ground, he caught it. She looked up, wide-eyed. "You saved my dragon." He smiled. "I think your dragon saved itself." Her father laughed. "Thank you." It was nothing. The little girl studied Ethan seriously. "My grandfather says dragons protect good people." Ethan knelt to her height. "Then your grandfather sounds very wise." She smiled brightly before running back toward her family. Several Horizon employees had quietly watched the exchange. No cameras. No audience. Just another ordinary kindness. Li Wei stood several meters away, watching. Not with anger. With confusion. How did moments like this always seem to find Ethan? Or did Ethan somehow create them? That question stayed with him longer than he expected. Later that evening, the company gathered to release floating lanterns across the lake. Each employee wrote one hope for the coming year. Some wished for healthy parents. Others hoped for children. Several simply wrote, "Peace." Ethan looked at his blank card for a long moment. Finally he wrote, "May the people around me become more successful than I ever imagined." He folded the paper quietly. No one saw. Li Wei hesitated much longer. Eventually, he wrote only 3 words. "Don't disappear." He stared at the sentence. He wasn't entirely sure who it was meant for. Himself. His company. His place in the story. Perhaps all 3. Across the lake, Lin Xiaoyu attended the festival with her older cousin and 2 young nieces. The youngest insisted on stopping at every lantern display. "Again," she laughed. "We already looked. But not enough." Lin smiled. Children never rushed beauty. Adults almost always did. As they crossed a small stone bridge, one lantern drifted loose from its string and landed gently at Lin's feet. She picked it up. Inside, someone had written, "Kindness is never wasted." No name. No signature. She looked around. The owner was nowhere to be found. She smiled and carefully rehung the lantern where another family could enjoy it. Later that night, the chairman raised a toast beside the frozen lake. "I've spent 40 years in business." The conversations quieted. "I've learned many things." He looked toward the younger employees. "But the most important lesson has nothing to do with profit." He paused. "The company's people remember. Are built by people who remember each other." Silence settled over the gathering. He smiled warmly. "Never become so ambitious. That success costs you your humanity." The applause was gentle, thoughtful. No one realized those words would soon become painfully relevant. As the celebration ended, employees slowly disappeared into the Beijing night. Laughter echoed across the frozen lake. Lanterns continued floating silently over the dark water. Ethan stood beside the railing for one final look. Li Wei joined him. For several minutes, neither man spoke. Finally, Ethan smiled. "I've never seen anything this beautiful." Li Wei looked toward the endless lanterns. "My grandfather used to bring me here." "What did he tell you?" Li Wei answered almost automatically. He said, "A lantern doesn't lose its light by helping another lantern burn brighter." Silence. The words surprised even him. He hadn't remembered that story in years. Ethan smiled. "He sounds like a remarkable man." He was. Another long silence followed. For just one heartbeat, the jealousy seemed to loosen its grip, as though the old Li Wei had stepped forward again. Then his phone vibrated. Another business magazine notification. Another article. Another photograph. Another headline featuring Ethan. The moment vanished, like a lantern carried away by the wind. Near midnight, back inside his apartment, Li Wei stood alone before the window overlooking Beijing. He thought about his grandfather's words. A lantern doesn't lose its light. Why then? Did he feel as though his own light was fading? He closed his eyes. He wanted peace. Instead, he found comparison. And comparison had become a habit. End of chapter 11. Thread lesson. The brightest light in the room is never your enemy. Darkness only wins when it convinces us another person's light has stolen our own. The wise learn to shine together. The shadow at the door. No one chooses a single moment that changes their life. It only feels that way in memory. We point to the handshake, the contract, the argument, the betrayal. And we say, that was the beginning. But beginnings are rarely that simple. They are made of hundreds of unnoticed choices. A thought left unchallenged. A compliment quietly resented. A wound left to grow. By the time the door finally opens, the journey toward it has already lasted a very long time. Shanghai was now only 2 weeks away. The excitement inside Horizon Dynamics had become contagious. The lobby displayed a countdown clock. 14 days. Employees stopped to look at it each morning. Some smiled. Some felt nervous. Most felt proud. This wasn't simply another conference. It was the moment the world would finally see what they had spent years building. The engineering team completed the final prototype. Applause erupted across the development floor. Someone uncorked sparkling cider. Another ordered late-night noodles for everyone. The atmosphere felt almost like a family celebrating together. Ethan looked around the room. Every tired face. Every coffee cup. Every whiteboard covered in equations. He realized something. The software wasn't the achievement. These people were. He quietly raised his glass. To everyone who believed. Before there was proof. The room answered with smiles instead of cheers. Some victories deserved quiet gratitude. Across the executive floor, Li Wei stood alone. He watched the celebration through the glass wall of his office. For the first time, he didn't walk down to join them. Instead, he closed the blinds. The movement went unnoticed. Everyone remained downstairs celebrating. Everyone. Except him. The next morning, the chairman gathered the executive team. "I have wonderful news." He smiled broadly. "The Ministry of Science has confirmed attendance." Several executives exchanged excited looks. So has the International Technology Council. Another round of smiles. And he looked directly toward Ethan. "They've requested that your keynote demonstration open the summit." The room applauded. Again. Li Wei applauded too. Again. No one noticed that his applause ended first. After the meeting, the chairman stopped him. You've been quiet lately. Li Wei forced a smile. Just tired. The chairman studied him carefully. You know, I've worked with founders my entire life. They all experience the same fear. Li Wei looked away. What fear? That one day, the company won't need them anymore. Silence. The older man smiled gently. The funny thing is, healthy companies eventually don't. They become bigger than all of us. He placed a reassuring hand on Li Wei's shoulder. And that's something to celebrate. Li Wei nodded politely. But the words landed differently than the chairman intended. Across Beijing, Lin Xiaoyu finally crossed paths with Horizon Dynamics. Her law firm received an inquiry regarding international patent filings connected to the Shanghai Summit. Nothing unusual. Nothing urgent. Only routine legal preparation. She reviewed the documents carefully. One company name caught her attention. Horizon Dynamics. She smiled. I've heard that name before. Her assistant nodded. The company everyone's talking about. Lin closed the file. I'd like to meet whoever built it someday. Fate smiled quietly. Soon. She would. Under circumstances neither of them could possibly imagine. That evening, Li Wei's phone vibrated once more. The same unknown number. One message. I hope our conversation was helpful. Some opportunities only appear once. Think carefully about who history will remember. No signature. No explanation. Only silence after the words. Li Wei deleted the message. But not before reading it 3 times. Some messages disappear from screens, long after they've become permanent inside the mind. Near midnight, the offices of Horizon Dynamics stood almost empty. Only Ethan remained. He walked slowly through each department, switching off lights, straightening forgotten chairs, collecting abandoned coffee mugs. Small things. His father had always done the same at the restaurant. The last person out takes care of the place. He reached the lobby. Mrs. Zhao looked up from the reception desk. You're leaving. He smiled. So are you. She laughed. You always make sure everyone gets home safely. My father used to. She nodded. He raised a good son. Ethan bowed his head slightly. I've been trying to deserve that. He stepped outside. Cold winter air greeted him. Across the street, a black sedan sat quietly with its headlights off. Inside, someone watched Horizon Dynamics. Not Ethan. The building. After several minutes, the sedan drove away without following him. The driver made a phone call. It's confirmed. A pause. Everything is proceeding exactly as expected. The call ended. The city swallowed the car into its endless flow of traffic. High above Beijing, snow began falling once more. Gentle, silent, almost beautiful enough to make people forget how cold winter could become. Inside his apartment, Li Wei stood before the window. He whispered his grandfather's words one last time. A lantern doesn't lose its light by helping another lantern burn brighter. He closed his eyes. I wish I still believed that. Outside, the snow continued falling. Inside, something else had quietly settled. Not anger. Not hatred. A decision. One that hadn't yet become action. But soon would. Very soon. And when it did, nothing inside Horizon Dynamics would ever be the same again. Every betrayal casts a shadow before it ever becomes visible. It begins with a wound left unattended, a truth left unspoken, a heart that slowly confuses recognition with worth. The tragedy is not that darkness exists. The tragedy is that it often grows while everyone else is celebrating the light. Every city remembers. Every choice leaves a mark. And somewhere between ambition and belonging, another golden thread is woven. Until next time, follow the thread.